Imagine a world where the greatest empire on earth declares war not for territory or treasure, but to safeguard a flood of poison. In the 19th century, Britain, the beacon of civilization and commerce, unleashed its navy against China. The reason? To defend the opium trade system that hooked millions into addiction while filling imperial coffers. This wasn't conquest for glory. It was protection for profit, rooted in a hidden economic desperation that reshaped nations. The story begins with tea leaves and silk threads, but it spirals into something darker. Britain craved Chinese luxuries, yet China demanded hard silver in return. As reserves dwindled, a clever inversion emerged. Opium from Indian fields became the key to unlocking that silver. Addiction wasn't a byproduct, it was the engine. And when China fought back, the empire struck to preserve the flow. What if the moral high ground of free trade was built on coercion? Britain's self-image, as a progressive force, clashed with its actions, revealing a system where ethics bend to balance sheets. The Opium Wars exposed this fracture. A nation preaching liberty while enforcing dependency. Power, it seems, designs its own necessities. In this hidden architecture of empire, addiction served as currency. Britain's war machine mobilized not for ideology, but to sustain a trade loop that converted human suffering into economic stability. The narcotics weren't the end, they were the means to reverse a draining silver tide. Empires rarely admit such truths. How could a champion of enlightenment descend into drug enforcement? The paradox lies in the structure of global exchange. Britain positioned itself as the arbiter of fair markets. Yet when imbalances threatened its wealth, it weaponized vice. Free trade, in this light, becomes a selective illusion, masking the control beneath. This contradiction didn't arise from malice alone, but from systemic pressure. As Chinese goods flowed out and silver vanished, innovation turned toxic. Opium production scaled under British oversight, transforming farms into factories of dependency. The empire's moral compass shifted, prioritizing fiscal survival over human cost. The war's declaration echoed a deeper logic. When trade deficits erode power, unconventional revenues emerge. Britain's narrative of progress concealed this reality, presenting intervention as righteous, yet the underlying mechanism was clear: addiction as arbitrage, turning weakness into wealth transfer. In the ports of Canton, tensions boiled over a substance that promised escape but delivered chains. Britain's insistence on free commerce ignored China's sovereignty, framing resistance as barbarism. This reframing allowed empire to justify force, preserving a system reliant on controlled harm. The hook of history pulls us into uncomfortable waters. Empires build on imbalances, then defend them fiercely. Britain's opium strategy was an aberration, it was adaptation. When silver shortages loomed, the drug trade stabilized the ledger at the expense of a civilization's health. Now consider the human scale. Millions ensnared, families fractured, all to fuel distant luxuries. Yet the empire saw opportunity in crisis. This war for narcotics protection reveals how power structures embed vice into economics, making morality a luxury few can afford. In 1839, the air in Canton thickened with defiance. Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu, tasked with stemming the opium tide, orchestrated a dramatic purge. Over 20,000 chests of the drug, worth fortunes, were seized and dissolved in lime pits before the sea. This act aimed to cleanse a nation gripped by addiction, but it ignited imperial fury. Britain's response was swift and unforgiving. Diplomats decried the destruction as theft, ignoring the humanitarian intent. Warships soon dotted the horizon, their cannons a blunt rebuttal to China's plea for sovereignty. The First Opium War erupted, not over dialogue, but dominance. Lin Zexu's campaign exposed the epidemic's grip. Opium dens proliferated, sapping productivity and health across provinces. Officials corrupted, society strained under the weight of imported vice. His bold move sought to sever the supply, but underestimated Britain's stake in the system. As British forces advanced, coastal cities fell under bombardment. The Qing dynasty, already weakened, faced a technological mismatch. Gunboats pierced rivers, enforcing terms that would humiliate a proud empire. This wasn't mere skirmish, it was the unraveling of an ancient order. The destruction of opium symbolized resistance, yet it provoked a calculated backlash. Britain's merchants, backed by Parliament, framed the seizure as an assault on property rights. Free trade rhetoric masked the reality. Addiction had become integral to economic balance. Naval blockades choked trade routes, forcing concessions. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 sealed the defeat. Ports opened, indemnities paid in silver. Hong Kong ceded as a colony, a foothold for further influence. China's century of humiliation began, eroding imperial authority. Internal repercussions rippled. Rebellions, like the Taiping Uprising, exploited the weakness. Foreign powers circled, carving spheres of control. The opium crisis, once contained, now flowed unchecked, deepening social decay. Britain's victory secured not just drugs, but dominance. The Second Opium War in 1856 amplified the conquest. Allied with France, Britain burned the Summer Palace, a cultural wound that lingers. More treaties followed, legalizing opium and extracting tariffs. The system of unequal pacts reshaped Asia's geopolitics. Opium revenue bolstered British India, funding administration and military. Plantations expanded. Laborers toiled under coercion. This extractive loop transferred wealth from east to west, sustaining empire through structured exploitation. The war's legacy, a fractured China, open to exploitation, setting stages for revolution. Britain's imperial network strengthened, linking opium profits to global trade. Yet this triumph sowed seeds of decline as resentment brewed across colonized lands. Britain's hunger for Chinese luxurious tea, silk, porcelain created an insatiable demand. But China, self-sufficient, accepted only silver bullion in payment. This one-way flow drained European coffers, threatening economic stability. The imbalance wasn't sustainable. Something had to give. Enter the British East India Company, architects of inversion. They ramped up opium cultivation in Bengal and Bihar, transforming agriculture into a narcotic powerhouse. High-quality poppy fields yielded resin that commanded premium prices in smuggling networks. Smugglers ferried the drug along China's coasts, evading bans. Opium dens multiplied, addiction spreading like a silent plague. Silver payments for the substance reversed the drain, flowing back to British hands. This cycle closed the loop, funding further imports. The mechanism was elegant in its cruelty. Addiction generated reliable demand. As users multiplied, silver extraction accelerated. Britain's trade deficit morphed into surplus. Opium acting as shadow currency in a rigged exchange. Step by step, the system embedded itself. Production in India scaled with demand, employing thousands in a chain of dependency. Ships carried the cargo, merchants profited, and governments taxed the windfall. Human weakness became economic certainty. This wasn't accidental vice. It was engineered balance. When silver shortages loomed, opium filled the void, converting social harm into fiscal health. The trade scale rivaled legitimate commerce, underscoring its structural role. As addiction deepened, China's economy officials bribed, enforcement weakened. Britain capitalized, using the revenue to expand influence. The mechanism revealed empires design addictions to sustain power. The opium engine didn't stop at borders. It fueled broader imperial machinery, from railway bonds to colonial administration. Silver recycled into tea purchases, perpetuating the cycle. Control over this flow equated to geopolitical leverage. In essence, the trade functioned as a currency converter, alchemizing suffering into stability. Without it, Britain's Asian ambitions might have faltered. The system prioritized continuity over conscience. This reversal of silver tides wasn't marginal, it was monumental. Opium trade volumes eclipsed other commodities, reshaping global finance. Empires thrive on such hidden gears, where vice props up virtue. The logic of the Opium Wars echoes in contemporary shadows. Nations today harbor industries that harm yet stabilize. Think speculative finance that inflates bubbles, or resource extraction that ravages environments. These aren't anomalies, they're systemic necessities. Consider narcotics in modern economies. Some governments decriminalize or regulate drugs, not for health, but revenue. Taxes on vice fund budgets, mirroring how opium indemnities bolstered Britain. Morality yields when fiscal pressures mount. Speculative finance perils closely. Derivatives and high-frequency trading create wealth illusions. Yet risk systemic collapse. Regulators tolerate them because they grease global capital flows, much like opium smooth trade imbalances. Destructive extraction oil, mining devastates communities and ecosystems, but sustains currencies and influence. Superpowers enable these through policy, prioritizing energy security over sustainability. The mechanism, harm, as hidden subsidy. In class terms, these systems transfer wealth upward. Elites benefit from the stability, while masses bear the cost: addiction, debt, pollution. Governments negotiate ethics to maintain control, echoing imperial calculations. Harmful tech platforms exploit user data, fostering addictions to attention. Yet they're shielded because they drive economic growth. The parallel. When dependency funds innovation, oversight softens, global debt structures function similarly. Loans to developing nations enforce extraction, perpetuating imbalances. Creditors design terms that ensure repayment through resources, not unlike opium's silver harvest. The constant, damaging streams become indispensable. Whether drugs, finance, or extraction, systems embed them for balance. Morality, in this architecture, is a flexible barrier. Nations enable arms trades that fuel conflicts, yet stabilize defense industries. The irony, peace rhetoric coexists with profitable chaos. This mirrors Britain's free trade facade over coercive commerce. Ultimately, the pattern persists because power depends on it. When revenues from harm plug structural gaps, reform threatens collapse. Empires old and new design conditions, where vice is inevitable. Empires rarely expand through noble ideals alone. They grow under financial duress, where trade gaps force innovation, often toxic. The Opium Wars illustrate this. Addiction engineered to invert imbalances, converting frailty into fortune. Power doesn't merely chase money. It architects the flows. By embedding vice into economics, empires ensure predictability. Human weakness, in this view, becomes a reliable asset in the ledger of control. Consider the philosophical core. Systems self-perpetuate by normalizing harm. What begins as expedient evolves into essential, reshaping societies around hidden dependencies. Morality, then, is not absolute, but contextual to power's needs. The illusion of free markets crumbles here. Britain's interventions revealed coercion as the underbelly of commerce. True balance requires force when voluntary exchange falters, exposing the fragility beneath. Class dynamics amplify this. Elites design mechanisms that extract from the vulnerable, framing it as progress. Addiction, debt, exploitation, these transfer value upward, sustaining hierarchies. Collapse lurks when dependencies fracture. China's humiliation stemmed from resisting the imposed system. Empires fall not from overreach, but when their engineered flows reverse unexpectedly. Reframing history. Wars aren't over resources, but the structures channeling them. Opium defended a financial architecture reliant on controlled decay. Power thrives by making the damaging indispensable. Philosophical insight. Confidence in systems masks their illusions. Britain's moral posturing hid economic desperation. True understanding pierces this, revealing how power designs inevitability. In the end, empires craft conditions where money flows predictably, even through suffering. The Opium Wars weren't about drugs. They defended a system running on addiction. Power engineers its own necessities. If this hidden logic resonates, subscribe for more revelations on money, power, and history's unseen structures. Like and share to spread the insight, because understanding the system is the first step to navigating it.